Hello and welcome into this Wednesday, August 6th edition of the League Winners Fantasy Show. I am, as always, your host, Dalton Salings, and today I'm going to be talking about a little draft strategy for your fantasy football drafts, things you want to know going in, the ability to adjust on the fly, things of that nature. But before we get too far into it, there's been a lot that's happened in the last 2 days in the football world. I want to give some updates. The Chargers yesterday signed wide receiver Keenan Allen. He's going to come in and I think play a lot on this team, potentially taking a lot of work away from Trey Harris, who I was high on previously. Trey Harris has dropped drastically in my rankings after this signing. Ladd McConkey moves down a little bit as well. I think it moves Justin Herbert up a spot. So actually jumped Justin Herbert up one spot in my rankings, moved Ladd McConkey down a couple of spots, and Trey Harris was really the biggest loser of this signing. He falls way down. I think Keenan Allen could have a real role on this team. Potentially being second in targets. I currently have him projected to be the second highest target getter on this team with 78 targets. Have him for about 8 fantasy points a game. Not crazy production, but I do think he is very relevant on this team this year. He slowed down a little bit last year. I expect him to kind of bounce back a bit and be relevant on this roster. With the Minnesota Vikings, I talked about Jordan Addison had a potential suspension coming. It's 3 games. That moves him down a lot for me. Obviously, him not being able to play those first 3 games is a big deal. I'm not even sure if he's draftable right now just because of the fact that he won't be playing. I still think he is going to have good production once he's on the field. The biggest winner of this news would be Jalen Nailor. Currently is looking like he's going to be the wide receiver 2 in Addison's absence. So Jalen Nailor is a guy that I've moved up in my rankings quite a bit. Not to a crazy spot, but just up a bit. He's a name to keep an eye on late in your draft to potentially have a little bit of early week production when it comes to the Minnesota Vikings wide receivers. And with that suspension coming for Jordan Addison, we can expect the news on Rashee Rice, the wide receiver for the Chiefs, to be coming somewhat soon as well. Obviously, I don't know when that'll come, but once it does, I'll update my rankings as well. One more piece of news to talk about will be the quarterback for the Rams, Matthew Stafford. So news did come out that he's suffering from a back injury. There were specifics given. He's supposed to be ready for week 1, but he's week to week right now. The backup there is Jimmy Garoppolo. I have enough confidence in Jimmy Garoppolo that I did not move any of the receivers for the Rams in my rankings because of this. So I think it'll be interesting to see really how these guys can work with both Garoppolo and then Stafford once he comes back. Obviously, Devontae Adams doesn't have any chemistry with Stafford yet. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I expect Puka to maybe get a little bit more work early in the season once Stafford returns, just because they have that connection already set in. But it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And like I said in the wide receiver video earlier this week, I am a little bit lower on Puka Nacua than consensus. Doesn't mean I think he's going to be bad. I just think other guys are going to be a little bit better this year. There's nothing wrong with that. Actually, Puka Nacua is now my wide receiver 5, or I'm sorry, no, that's by ADP. He's the wide receiver 5 off the board. He is still my wide receiver 10 for this season. I still have Ladd McConkey over him. T. Higgins I still have over him. So didn't move Puka in my rankings because of this, but it could be beneficial to him if Stafford comes back week 1. He could see an increased work for those first couple of weeks. So with that being the news, I'm going to talk a little bit about draft strategy today. And what I mean by that is plans you have going into your draft, things you should do before you're drafting, things you're doing during the draft to try and produce the best team possible. I've heard it said a lot that you can't win your league at your draft. I think that is true, but I think you can definitely give yourself a great head start. And the first thing going into your draft is understanding your format. It's very important to know what kind of league you're playing in. All my rankings I do in the PPR format, and it's my favorite way to play. A lot of people that play competitively prefer the half PPR format. So that's half a point for every reception. If that's the case, you're going to have to adjust how you view these players a little bit. Specifically, like if I were looking at the running backs, guys like Alvin Kamara, Devon Achane, guys I have getting a lot of receptions this year, moving them down a little bit because they're not being as rewarded for those catches as they are in a full PPR. And if you're playing in a standard league, that's even more so the case where you need to factor that in for these guys who aren't getting that potentially 70 extra fantasy points on those receptions. It can actually drastically change the rankings because of that fact. So understanding what kind of league you're playing in is very important. Also understanding who you're playing against. If it's a league you've been in before, if it's your family league, you know things about these people. Who are the players that they like? Is there a spot where you can take advantage by maybe having to draft a player earlier that you know a family member really enjoys that team? Or is it one of your league mates you play with for years isn't going to take a certain player? They've been burned by Christian McCaffrey in the past. You can wait an extra round to take him because no one in your league is going to grab that guy. Understanding who you're playing against and the people in your league can be a huge advantage for your drafts just because you can extract the most value you possibly can. Now, I've talked a lot about guys that I believe in more than consensus, and I'm sure that you also have people that you think are going to do better than they're projected. It's okay to take those guys earlier than they're being drafted. If you think, for example, Alvin Kamara is going to have a breakout year and he's going at pick 43, waiting until pick 43 is dangerous because you don't know if someone else will have that belief that you have. So going out and grabbing him maybe a round early can be a strong play, and that works especially well with late round sleepers. Let's say you're a big believer in Zay Flowers this year, a little middle round guy, take him around early. Or maybe it's Demario Douglas with the Patriots. Grab him a pick before your last pick because you want to make sure you get the guys you believe in. Another thing on the guys you believe in, if it's early in the year and that late round flyer you took is not getting the touches that you expected, don't be afraid to cut ship on that. There's no reason to hold on to a guy because your preseason expectations where they would do so well if that production isn't following. Don't be afraid to trade that guy. If it's someone that you expected to have a hot start, I've talked a lot about how the veteran running backs I expect to have hot starts, like a Jerome Ford, Jalen Warren, guys like that. I expect to have some hot starts. Don't be afraid to cut bait on those guys. If they have the hot start, trade them at that value. Be open to making trades and drafting guys that you know, okay, I'm okay trading this guy. If you draft Jalen Warren, be aware that you could get a good offer from him, and don't be married to the guys that you draft on draft day. Be open to trading those guys later. It's important to also enter your draft with a plan. If you know what pick you have in advance, that's always awesome. Even if it's just an hour before they announce the draft order, going in with a plan can help you really to kind of guide your draft. If you know you're picking in the 5th spot, you know a lot of those, potentially both top 2 running backs will be off the board and maybe 2 receivers. Okay, well, if that happens, I'm going to take CeeDee Lamb. Or if one of the running backs falls, I'm going to grab running back. Having a couple plans for that first round and potentially being able to build your draft off of that and not being scared at your first pick. You know about who's going to be there. You know the guys you like. Make a plan on who you want to get and don't necessarily deviate from that in the first round. Now, you may have a plan for your whole draft. You might say, I'm going to draft Jefferson in the first and I'm going to come back and I'm going to go any running back in the second. Let's say you're going to go Jonathan Taylor in the second. If Jonathan Taylor's gone, don't panic. It's okay to go 2 wide receivers early. It's okay to grab a different running back. Have a couple different things early in the draft that you want to do. And as the draft goes along, make the adjustments to your plan. If your plan was to go very heavy on running backs and the running back value wasn't there, make an adjustment. Don't try and stick to what you think is the best strategy pre-draft, because the best strategy is whatever the board gives you. If the board's giving you certain things, take advantage of that. Take advantage of the players that are sliding or grab your guy. But regardless, don't necessarily be married to the plan you make, but it's good to have a plan so that you know going in about what you're looking for and where the value is. It's also important to understand your site. I use the sleeper ADP when I'm talking about guys where they're being drafted. ESPN and ESPN Fantasy has a very different ranking. Their ADPs can be drastically different at times. It's important to understand, this is a player I really like and his ADP shows up way later. It's okay for me to take him earlier. I don't have to take a guy at his ADP. I can reach if necessary. Another thing people talk about in drafts is stacks. So the typical stack would be going with a wide receiver or a tight end and the quarterback from the same team. A lot of people try and avoid stacks of saying a tight end and a running back, or a wide receiver and a running back, or a wide receiver and a tight end. I think it depends. My take on this is if you do it, there's ways to do it right. I'm going to use my Giants for an example. If I get Malik Neighbors in the back of the first round and I end up wanting to go Tyrone Tracy later, I would do that. I think both of those guys have ceilings that aren't dependent on one another or really a third party. Russell Wilson's at quarterback. If Jameis Winston or Jackson Dart comes in, I don't think Neighbors probably takes a hit, but I don't think it affects Tracy. Now, if it's a different team, say the Steelers, and you go DK Metcalf and Jalen Warren, well, that's a little bit scarier because Aaron Rodgers' health is very dependent on this. If Aaron Rodgers gets injured, both of those guys will lose some value immediately. Caleb Johnson will probably take over as the RB1 if Aaron Rodgers were to go down, and DK Metcalf wouldn't get as many good targets from Mason Rudolph. So it will be interesting to see how you can balance maybe getting those stacks. And I don't target those stacks typically between the wide receivers and running backs or running backs and tight ends. But if they fall to me, I'm not going to not take someone because I already have a player on that team. Now, when it comes to players on the same team and also bye weeks, it's important to keep an eye on, but you shouldn't base your draft on bye weeks. If you have a couple players with the same bye week, that's okay. It's a long season. Having a couple guys miss 1 week because of their byes is not the end of the world. You're probably not going to go undefeated in your fantasy football season, regardless of how well you draft. There's a good chance things are going to happen to make you not go undefeated. You are trying to make the playoffs, and once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen. If you draft 3 players with the same bye week, that's okay. Now, when you're filling out your bench, it is important to keep an eye on bye weeks. It doesn't have to influence your decision, but just to keep an eye on it. If you have 3 starting wide receivers all with the same bye week, and you're looking at another wide receiver that has that same bye, maybe take the next guy, because you are going to need to be able to play players there. But on the other hand, you can take your guy. You're going to have a very different team by week 10 than what you have in the draft. If you have 3 receivers by week 10 and you draft another one, there's a chance 2 of those guys aren't on your roster anymore by week 10, and you have a completely different team. It's okay to draft guys with the same bye weeks. Now, I've had people ask me in the past what to do with late round picks. Do you take that backup tight end, backup quarterback, or do you grab extra wide receivers and running backs? For me, it is very dependent upon who I have. If I went early tight end, if I end up with a Bowers or a McBride, I'm probably not going to draft a backup tight end. I am really heavily investing in that first tight end, and I'm trusting them to be able to go out and perform week after week. If I need to pick up for their bye week another tight end, I'll have bench slots I can drop someone and pick up that extra tight end. But in the draft, it's better for me to take a shot on, say, a late round running back or a wide receiver with upside than another tight end. Same thing with the quarterback position. If I have Lamar, if I have Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, any of those guys, it's important for me to go ahead and not need to get another one. I have that guy. I've invested heavily in the position. I'm not going to draft a backup. Now, the difference is if I draft, say, a Justin Fields, a Drake May, someone later in the draft, I might grab a second quarterback because I'm not as heavily invested in the position. I can take that second quarterback, and I'm comfortable playing that other quarterback if they play well to start the season. Maybe a Justin Herbert and, say, a Caleb Williams. Grabbing 2 guys like that and being able to feel comfortable playing either of them because you didn't invest so heavily in the position is perfectly fine. And the same thing with the tight ends. I've seen myself drafting a Dalton Kincaid and a Brenton Strange, or a Jake Ferguson and a Hunter Henry, because I would be okay playing either of those guys and I'm not so heavily invested. When it comes to the late round wide receivers or running backs, the things I'm looking for, specifically at running back to start, is a guy that has the potential to step in, right? Guys I love late in drafts, Ray Davis is a guy I'm loving late in drafts right now because I can put him into the lineup. If James Cook doesn't show up to camp because he doesn't have the money, or if he gets injured, Ray Davis is in for a huge role. You're not going to find a lot of very consistent performers in the late rounds of the draft. Really, Austin Eckler is actually kind of the one guy I'm looking at as potentially a consistent performer late in the draft. But you're not going to find a guy that you're going to get week after week production with your last pick, typically. What you're looking for is a guy who could step into a role. Ray Davis, Tajay Spears is that. Zach Charbonnet is going late in drafts. He's that as well. Guys like that could potentially become the RB1 on their team and have a lot of value is really what I'm looking for there. And at wide receiver, it's almost the opposite. I'm looking for guys who can perform and will be on the field a lot. Demario Douglas, I've talked about a little bit. He's a guy I'm looking at late in the draft at wide receiver where I'm saying I can get this guy and I can feel comfortable that I'm able to play him if I need to. Now, he's not going to get huge production, but I can play him if necessary. Jalen Naylor is a guy like that right now, where you can play him the first 3 weeks. He can have good production. Guys at wide receiver that have that clear space to play is what I'm looking for late in the draft because we don't see as many wide receiver injuries. We don't see guys taking as many hits at wide receiver and potentially getting injured. So it is kind of better to find a guy that has a chance for production, in my opinion, with that last pick. If your league does kickers and defenses, I know a lot of leagues still do. A lot of my leagues still use kickers and defenses as well. Those are my last 2 picks. I'm not drafting a backup. I don't care if I get the worst defense. It doesn't matter to me. I'm drafting them last, and I am picking a new one up on waivers every week. If necessary, I'm streaming the matchups. And for kickers, I'm taking whoever. There's no way to predict a kicker's success year over year. I'm just taking whoever's there. Maybe it's a name I like. Maybe it's my team's kicker. Whatever it is, I'm not reaching for a kicker or a defense, and you shouldn't either. There is no reason to be drafting them before the last 2 rounds. There's no real positional advantage there year after year, and therefore there's no reason to really attack it. That actually concludes my draft strategies. Those are things I've used in my draft, things I try and remember while I'm drafting. Just trying to not get off balance and remain confident throughout the draft is the best advice I can give. So thank you very much for tuning in today. I hope to have a special episode out this week. We'll see if it ends up happening. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your days.